Welcome and thank you for joining me tonight. Find a comfortable position, let the day slowly fade away and allow yourself to simply listen. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be, and nothing expected of you except to relax. As our story unfolds, you can follow every detail, or simply let the sound of my voice carry you gently towards sleep. Now, let's begin. Imagine Washington D.C., not as we know it, gleaming monuments and bustling streets, but engulfed in flames. It's hard to believe that the very heart of American democracy faced such a devastating threat, but it did. In 1814, during the War of 1812, British forces marched into the capital city, leaving behind a trail of destruction that nearly erased it from the map. How could this happen? The War of 1812 wasn't just some border squabble. It was a tense showdown between the young United States and Great Britain, a nation still reeling from Napoleon's wars in Europe. For years, American ships had been harassed on the high seas, with their crews impressed into British naval service. Resentment simmered, and then, in 1812, America declared war, but was it ready? Britain controlled the seas, it was undeniable. Their navy was the most powerful in the world, giving them a tremendous advantage. Look at this map. Notice how British warships patrolled almost every major American port from New England to Louisiana. Coastal cities were vulnerable, and Washington, D.C., located inland but accessible by rivers, wasn't immune. American military officials knew something was brewing. Letters between commanders paint a picture of growing dread. Raids on American towns along the coast were becoming more frequent and bolder, as they weren't just seizing ships anymore. They were burning buildings and stealing supplies. The fear wasn't just about losing battles, it was about what that might unleash. Then came the news that changed everything. Word arrived in Washington. The British fleet had landed at Bladensburg, Maryland, just a few miles northeast of the capital. It was a chilling warning sign, a direct threat, but many dismissed it, believing the militia could easily hold them back. What would happen when they were wrong? The Battle of Bladensburg was a disaster. American militia, poorly trained and equipped, were routed by seasoned British troops. It wasn't a glorious stand, it was a rout. The Americans retreated in disarray, leaving behind weapons and equipment, shattering any illusion of easy victory. A humiliating defeat. Bladensburg wasn't just a defeat, it exposed a critical vulnerability. The lack of effective defenses around Washington was staggering. With the American militia scattered and demoralized, the British now had a clear path to the capital city, opening the door for an invasion that few could have imagined. President James Madison received the news from Bladensburg with a surprising lack of urgency. Initially, he downplayed it, viewing it as just another skirmish, a minor setback that wouldn't threaten the capital itself. He couldn't have known then how wrong he was, and how costly his complacency would be. But as British forces advanced closer to Washington, reality began to sink in. Panic spread like wildfire through the city. Government officials started scrambling to protect valuable documents and artifacts. Residents realized they might have to flee, leaving everything behind. How would they escape? Accounts from those who lived through it describe scenes of utter chaos. People desperately tried to evacuate, carrying what they could, family heirlooms, important papers, anything of value. But time was running out. The British were coming, and the fate of Washington, D.C. hung precariously in the balance. Panic gripped Washington as news of the British advance arrived. The government knew vital records couldn't risk falling into enemy hands. A frantic scramble began. Clerks and officials worked against the clock, packing crates with treaties, dispatches, and even personal letters from George Washington himself. It was a desperate attempt to safeguard years of painstaking work, knowing what might happen if it all fell into British control. Amidst the chaos, one figure stood out, Dolly Madison. While others debated and delayed, she took charge. "We must save what we can," she reportedly declared. She rallied servants to load priceless portraits and artifacts onto wagons, a true symbol of American resilience. Her actions weren't just about preserving possessions. They were a defiant statement, a message that America wouldn't surrender its identity without a fight. But how much could one woman really save before it was too late? The American military, though present, was woefully unprepared. Militia units were cobbled together from farmers and shopkeepers, brave men certainly, but lacking training and experience. Attempts to organize a defense quickly fell apart. There simply weren't enough troops to meet the British threat. Supplies were scarce, communication lines were weak. The sheer scale of the challenge became painfully clear. A desperate situation with little hope for success. Then came news. The British were approaching, not just a raiding party, but a full-scale invasion force. Their numbers dwarfed anything the Americans could muster. Seasoned veterans, well-equipped and battle-hardened. This wasn't some minor skirmish. It was a direct assault on the nation's capital, and the odds couldn't have looked worse. How would these citizen soldiers possibly stand against such an overwhelming force? A desperate attempt was made to slow the British advance. A small American militia force tried to block their path, hoping to buy time for the government's evacuation, but it was a futile effort. The Americans were quickly outmatched and overwhelmed, suffering heavy casualties in a brief but brutal engagement. It served as a stark reminder of the vast difference in military power, a sobering defeat before the main battle even began. With barely a whimper of resistance, British troops marched into Washington, D.C. The American defenses had simply crumbled. There was no organized opposition to greet them, no barricades, no determined stand. It was an astonishingly easy victory for the invaders, a humiliating moment for the United States. But what drove these soldiers forward with so little challenge? First to fall was the Capitol building. Flames erupted from its windows and soared into the night sky, a terrifying spectacle that signaled the collapse of American authority. The fire raged uncontrollably, consuming everything in its path. It wasn't just a building burning. It was a symbol of democracy itself going up in smoke. Then came the White House. The iconic symbol of American power was next, engulfed by flames that cast an eerie glow over the city. Furniture shattered, portraits melted, years of history reduced to ash and embers. It was a devastating blow, a visual embodiment of America's vulnerability. But why did they do it? What fueled this destructive rage? It was revenge, some British soldiers later confessed. For the insults, for the attacks on our ships. The burning of Washington wasn't just a military objective, it was an act of retribution, a brutal response to perceived American provocations, a cycle of violence fueled by years of resentment and escalating tensions. But did that justify such destruction? As the fires died down, the true extent of the loss became clear. Priceless documents, irreplaceable records of American history, were destroyed or looted. Artwork vanished, stolen treasures carried away as trophies of war, an immeasurable cultural heritage lost forever. But what legacy would this night leave behind? How would a nation rebuild from such ashes? The Library of Congress, gone. Reduced to embers and ash. Oof. It's almost impossible to comprehend the scale of what was lost. Decades, centuries even, of irreplaceable manuscripts, maps and books vanished in a single night. The nation's intellectual heart ripped out. Scholars will mourn this loss for generations. And so when the British marched through the streets, they didn't just destroy buildings, they targeted something far more fundamental. But even amidst such devastation, humanity flickered. Stories emerged, neighbors helping neighbors salvage what they could. Some risked their lives to rescue treasured possessions from burning homes. Then there were others, who saw opportunity in the chaos and began looting abandoned shops and houses. It was a stark reminder of how easily order can dissolve when fear takes hold. Who would you be during such times? The news spread like wildfire, literally. Across the Atlantic, in London, and throughout Europe, reports of Washington's burning shocked diplomats and politicians alike. Could this fledgling nation truly defend itself? Was America's experiment in democracy a fragile illusion? The British hoped to shatter American resolve, to demonstrate that resistance was futile, but they underestimated something, a stubborn spirit. With their objectives seemingly achieved, the public buildings reduced to rubble, a symbolic blow struck against the American government. The British began their withdrawal. They marched back towards the naval ships that brought them, leaving behind a city scarred and smoking. The silence was almost as deafening as the roar of the flames had been. It felt like an ending, not a pause. The smoke began to clear, revealing the full extent of the devastation. Ashes settled on everything, homes, businesses, hopes. Survivors slowly emerged from their hiding places, blinking in the harsh light and bracing themselves for what they would find. War. But how could a city possibly rise from such ruin? What will it take to rebuild? As quickly as possible, people started returning, driven by a need to know, a desperate hope that their homes might still be standing. But many found their worst fears confirmed. Houses looted and stripped bare. Others returned to find nothing but smoldering foundations. The sense of betrayal was palpable. Who could you trust in times like these? The sheer scale of the destruction was overwhelming. Government buildings, businesses, homes, all reduced to rubble. Those who had fled earlier now returned to witness the aftermath. A stark contrast between those who'd escaped and those trapped by circumstance. The weight of loss settled on everyone. It felt like a wound that might never heal.
Night.
President Madison, having narrowly escaped capture during the British advance, made his way back to the gutted capital. He knew he had to act quickly. A government without a seat couldn't function. Directives were issued, plans laid for relocating essential functions to Maryland, a temporary refuge while Washington could be rebuilt. But containing the damage proved difficult. The initial attempts at firefighting were chaotic, disorganized, and desperately short of resources. Embers smoldered in hidden corners, threatening to reignite the blaze. A palpable sense of helplessness settled over the city. What could be done against forces so immense? News of the burning reached Philadelphia, then the temporary capital, and triggered a flurry of activity. Officials scrambled to prepare for an influx of refugees and displaced government functions. But could Philadelphia handle the burden? How would they manage this crisis while simultaneously trying to maintain some semblance of order? What happens next? Amidst the devastation, something remarkable emerged. Acts of kindness. Neighbors helped neighbors salvage what they could, sharing meager rations with those who'd lost everything. A blacksmith risked his life to pull a family from a burning home. These small moments offered a flicker of hope in a city consumed by flames. It was the human spirit, refusing to be extinguished entirely, even as Washington burned. But fear thrived too. Without reliable news, rumors spread like wildfire. Worse than the actual blaze. Was there more to come? Would the British return for another round of destruction? People huddled together, whispering anxieties, unsure who they could trust. Even those far from the capital felt a tremor of uncertainty. What does this mean for our future? The silence was as terrifying as the fire itself. As the smoke began to clear, federal employees faced an impossible task, trying to piece together what remained of government records. Ledgers were charred, treaties reduced to ash, and vital correspondence lost forever. The sheer volume of destruction was staggering. A sense of overwhelming responsibility settled upon them. Could they possibly rebuild what had been so carelessly destroyed? The immediate need for food and shelter quickly overwhelmed any existing relief efforts. Those with resources, landowners, merchants, were better positioned to recover, but many ordinary citizens lost everything. Families slept in the streets, begging for scraps. The disaster exposed a stark reality. Recovery wouldn't be equal. It would amplify inequalities already within the young nation. Then came reports, unsettling reports, of looting. Amidst the chaos and confusion, some seized the opportunity to profit from others' misfortune. Houses were stripped bare, valuables stolen under cover of darkness. It wasn't just the British who had inflicted pain. Betrayal festered alongside grief. How could anyone trust their neighbors after this? Even as the main fires subsided, danger lingered. Embers smoldered beneath rubble, fueled by wind and dry timber. Suddenly, a new fire erupted in a partially destroyed building, a terrifying reminder that the crisis wasn't over. Firefighters, armed with little more than buckets and axes, desperately fought to contain the renewed blaze, but it seemed an endless battle. President Madison, struggling to maintain order and morale, sent messages, painstakingly relayed by weary messengers, across the country. He condemned Britain's actions and vowed rebuilding, but could he truly reassure a nation reeling from such devastation? His words were met with cautious optimism. Many wondered if promises could ever outweigh this profound loss. News of the burning reached Europe, sparking a wave of reactions. Some nations condemned Britain's blatant disregard for international norms. Others expressed sympathy but cautioned against hasty retaliation, fearing an escalation of hostilities. The world watched with bated breath. What would America do next? What would this act of aggression mean on the global stage? The first refugees began their journey to Philadelphia, a city now struggling under the weight of unexpected arrivals. Overcrowding became rampant, and resources stretched thin. Resentment simmered between those who had lost everything and those who'd always known stability. How long could this fragile coexistence last? Recognizing the monumental task ahead, Congress formed a special committee dedicated solely to assessing the damage and planning for reconstruction. But how could they possibly rebuild a city from ashes? With limited funds and deep divisions over the best course of action, their challenge seemed insurmountable. What steps must be taken now? The initial assessments were brutal. Rebuilding Washington D.C. seemed almost impossible. Early estimates placed the cost in the millions, an unimaginable sum at that time. Could a fledgling nation, still burdened by debt and internal divisions, truly afford such a monumental undertaking? The debate raged. Should they rebuild? Or was it time to consider relocating the capital elsewhere? The future of the nation's seat of power hung precariously in the balance. But even amidst the devastation, hope flickered. Architectural plans began to surface, early sketches for a redesigned Washington, D.C. They reflected a newfound understanding of urban planning and disaster preparedness. Wider avenues were proposed, designed to prevent fire spread, and buildings would utilize more fire-resistant materials like brick and stone. Can we build back better? The question echoed through Congress and beyond. A chance to create something truly enduring, a capital that wouldn't just survive but thrive. The first task was clearing away the wreckage. Teams of men, soldiers, laborers, and volunteers began the backbreaking work of removing debris from the burned-out city. Each pile of rubble represented a loss: homes, businesses, memories. The smell of smoke lingered for weeks, a constant reminder of the destruction. It wasn't just bricks and mortar that were gone. It was a sense of national identity, momentarily shattered. As the smoke cleared, a moment of reflection arrived. A memorial service was held in Philadelphia, the temporary seat of government. It wasn't a grand spectacle. It was simple and heartfelt. People from all walks of life gathered to mourn those lost and reaffirm their commitment to the nation. How do we move forward? That question resonated deeply, a collective expression of grief, but also a renewed sense of unity amidst adversity. Amidst the chaos and despair, stories of heroism emerged. Amidst the chaos and despair, stories of heroism emerged. Amidst the chaos and despair, stories of heroism emerged. Dolly Madison's actions became legendary. Her desperate race to save George Washington's portraits and other valuables from the White House before it fell to the British. She risked her life to preserve pieces of American history, symbols of their ideals. Her bravery wasn't just about saving objects, it was about safeguarding a nation's soul. The financial burden was immense. Congress acted swiftly, authorizing emergency funding to aid those affected by the fire. But beneath the surface of relief efforts, something else began to stir: blame. A formal inquiry into the events leading up to the burning was launched. Some politicians were already pointing fingers, eager to deflect responsibility for what had happened. The slow process of rebuilding began. Government offices were temporarily relocated to Maryland, a practical necessity while Washington, D.C. lay in ruins. Plans for permanent structures started taking shape, but it was clear that the road ahead would be long and arduous. Each brick laid represented a step towards restoring national pride, one small victory against the memory of defeat. Even as reconstruction commenced, voices began recording what happened. Historians started meticulously documenting the events of that night. Their accounts, oral histories, personal letters, and official reports would shape how future generations understood this pivotal moment in American history. What lessons can we learn from this tragedy? They asked themselves and their readers. The burning of Washington, D.C. ignited something unexpected, a surge of national pride. It was a crucible that forged a stronger sense of American identity. The humiliation spurred them to action, fueling a desire for a more robust military and a renewed commitment to defending the nation's borders. Lessons learned in fire. As the city slowly rose from the ashes, Americans were left to grapple with profound questions. How fragile are our institutions? What does it truly mean to safeguard liberty? The scars of that night remained, etched into the landscape and the collective memory, but so too did an enduring spirit of resilience, a testament to the nation's ability to overcome adversity.